Okay, hello, my friends. It is Saturday, February 15th, 2025, and this is three big stories. And so we're going to stay with about three big stories. First is a Munich postmortem. Let's look at what was actually happening at the conference, and we'll talk about that sort of thing. And then we'll talk about peace deal scenarios and how this peace deal could go this way or could go that way or that sort of thing. And then what's the Russian reaction both to the scenarios and to Munich? So we'll start here with Zelenskyy. And by the way, my very last video before this was Zelenskyy taking these kinds of questions like you see, he's saying here, I don't want to be the person in history who helped Putin occupy my country, right? So he's taking these questions before a reporter who just is almost like trying to tempt him into saying bad things about Trump, and he dodges and weaves and just tries to work around it in order, and like he just diplomatically does such a great job staying on course without getting tempted, because he was tempted. I mean, you could almost tell that he wanted to say something bad, because it was frustrating what happened in the last week, right? Taking the phone call, like, for example, I'll show you in that video where she's asking him about that phone call. Were you upset that he called Putin first? And he's like trying not to say it, but it's still like, well, I mean, yeah, I would have preferred the whatever, but she's trying to get him into that, and he won't do it. Okay, so let's keep going. So Zelenskyy's at this conference. The Institute for the Study of War says President Zelenskyy and U.S. President J.D. Vance met on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference on February 14th. Vance stated during a press conference following the meeting that the United States remains committed to ending the war and achieving a durable, lasting peace in Ukraine, not the kind of peace that's just going to have Eastern European conflict just a couple years down the road. Okay, so that's good, that last clause. I don't think he really cares that much about the peace, in the sense of, like, it's not that important to him. Like, Ukraine's just not that important to him, and that actually came out in that conversation that Zelenskyy was having with the reporter. Okay, at the Munich Security Conference, I emphasized that European policy must not be just promising. It must make America want to stand with a strong Europe. Europe must decide its own future with confidence and its strength, so that others have no choice but to respect its power. That's right. That's what peace through strength is. Peace through strength is not just going, well, they're going to take care of it. And okay, so that'll take away the argument that Trump has about, like, hey, we're being ripped off because they're not paying for it and we're doing all the work, and right. Okay. So regardless of what you think about Trump, Zelenskyy's right here. And yeah, I mean, just Europe needs to stand up. Keith Kellogg was saying, after visiting Ukraine, we'll compare notes with Special Envoy Witkoff. Now, so I thought that Kellogg was supposed to be both going to Ukraine and going to Russia, but apparently Trump wants this guy Witkoff, who is a Middle East envoy, to be the one talking primarily with Trump. We'll compare notes with Witkoff and discuss everything with Trump in the Oval Office, how allies envision the lasting peace and border security. We need a new framework to work with. Okay. Now, part of this was that it was General Kellogg that was talking about, they have to have elections and that sort of thing. And then he kind of backed away from it a little bit, it seems. But Andrew Perpetuo posted this, and I thought this was interesting and something worth pointing out. Elections can only be held under strict conditions. Now, again, it can't be held under martial law unless they change the Constitution. So let's first say that. But elections practically can only be held under strict conditions, which eliminate Putin's influence. They have to be fair, free of manipulation, and they must be legal. So that means they can only happen when the war is over and under strict scrutiny from the international community, unless you're Russia or Belarus, which doesn't really care about actual elections and having it free and fair. Okay. And so with that, he says, the elections are ready to be performed. You'll know when the elections are ready to be performed because Putin will pump out propaganda saying elections are bad. It's a really interesting thought to think that, like, that actually will be a sign that it will be free and fair and that things are on the right track for it. Okay, what is needed, according to Zelenskyy? Zelenskyy says the armed forces of Europe as an upgrade to NATO, a common European foreign policy, a level of European cooperation that Washington has to take seriously, international law, keeping all pressure on Russia because That pressure is what guarantees peace, not Putin's words, not just some papers. And he's gone down the not just the some papers route before, and that hasn't worked out. So we're learning our lessons here. Gary Kasparov says this is accurate. Understanding what Putin actually wants versus what his propaganda and his puppets say is vital. He needs constant conflict to distract from his failed dictatorship. He wants to destroy the Ukrainian nation for its resources and the Russian Empire. Act accordingly. Okay, so I raised this thing with Kasparov because it doesn't. I don't think Putin actually wants peace. Like I'm not sure he even wants a rest. Forgive my throat. I still haven't been able to shake this cough. Okay, so I'm not sure that he even wants to have the peace negotiations that he seems to be entering into. I think he wants a better deal if he can get it to, take more stuff, but I think he'll want to keep going even after that. He just kind of does need to keep going. His economy is going to be in a bad way if he just had peace tomorrow. And so that's a really interesting thought. Now, here's a great conversation with Maria Bartiromo on Fox as General Keith Kellogg. And I just want to show you a little clip of what Kellogg's saying. It's not terribly comforting to my mind.
Secretary of Defense Hegseth was right. You're not going back to 2014 and the border they had right before they went into Crimea. The Russians went into Crimea. That's understandable, So I think what you're going to have is some type of agreement on potentially the loss of territory. But look, you don't necessarily have to acknowledge that. We didn't do that with the Baltics. There was a thing called the Wells Doctrine when the Soviets subjugated the Baltic countries. We never said they owned the countries. They said they were just under domination. And I think
so he's saying, yeah, they're going to have to give up some land, but they don't have to acknowledge it. That's not a good deal. Like, who's paying reparations in that scenario? Europe is going to be like paying to rebuild. It's not going to be the Russians who did the freaking damage to begin with. Like, that's the problem here with this hurry up peace is unless the Russians actually have to ask, like, please stop, because either they're beaten on the battlefield or there's economic problems in Russia that are causing them to have to do it. Unless if they have a peace prematurely before something like that, then the Russians are going to essentially offshore that bill of reconstructing Ukraine to Europe. That's the reality here. Okay. Europe must triple its aid to Ukraine if the U.S. reduces support, said a defense expert. And now we're just talking about defense. We're not even talking about the reconstruction like I was just talking about. With uncertainty over American military aid, Kyiv needs a stronger European commitment to sustain its defense and deter Russian aggression. Yeah, that's correct. Like, that's one scenario. That's one way that we could go. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen said Ukraine deserves, if not NATO membership, then at least security guarantees that are on par with NATO membership. Okay, I mean, isn't Ukraine part of the European family? Like, not part of the EU yet, but working toward it and part of the continent? Yeah, okay. So, but what does that look like? And that looks like a lot of commitment. And the Europeans just haven't had the will for that commitment to be to that degree yet. And we'll see if that's coming along down the line. Okay, here is Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, a Republican senator from South Carolina, talking about this. And he's been a pretty strong advocate. How do you deter Putin? You arm this guy, and he points at President Zelenskyy to the teeth. You give him a bunch of F-16s, and you give them ATACMS. You give them tanks because they'll fight.
To this thing for 25 years. John McCain, every conference, Putin sucks. He's a liar. Oh, no, you got him wrong. Putin was here. All the people worried about the phone call, where were you when we needed to stop Putin? Why didn't he invade when Trump was president? Because he's afraid of Trump.
Okay, that's a Republican way of seeing what's going on here, and it's pretty consistent on the Republican side of the spectrum. He's afraid of Trump. I know Democrats don't believe this. I'm just telling you how Republicans are seeing it. Okay, let's keep going.
That's why he didn't invade. Why did he invade in 2014? Because he could get away with it. Why didn't he invade again? Because he could get away with it. I want to tell you.
2014 was during the Obama administration, by the way. And then when he invaded again, it was during the Biden administration. So I would expect a Republican to be making these kind of Republican kind of talking points. But what he says next is brilliant.
You and your people, you're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. Not one American has died.
Do you hear that? You're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. That's right. It's been hard to find leaders in other places that were willing to step up and fight. Think about Iraq. Think about Afghanistan. Think about Vietnam. Like, it's been hard, and Zelenskyy and Ukraine have been willing to step up and fight.
Defending Ukraine. You've taken our weapons and you've kicked their ass. And I'm very proud to have you as our ally. Now, how does this war end? It ends in a way I hope so we don't do this yet again. Do y'all agree with that? So it doesn't matter to me who Trump calls or when he calls. It matters to me how it ends. Afghanistan ended poorly. Do you all agree with that? Well, this will not end poorly. President Trump is not going to do in Ukraine what we did in Afghanistan. He's going to try to find a way to make sure this war ends sooner rather than later. And when I talk to people about at home why it matters, Putin won't stop unless somebody stops him. Well, you're stopping him. But he'll keep going unless you get the conditions right. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think he's going to find a way to end this war in a fashion that Putin would be a fool to do it again. Very quickly. How do you deter Putin? You arm this guy to the teeth. Yeah, you give him a bunch of F-16s, not a few F-16s. You give them ATACMS, you give them tanks, because they will fight. But
as I showed you earlier, what we have done so far, General Breedlove, I showed this in a daily brief this morning. General Breedlove said, well, we only gave them so much and we slow walked our training. Like we could have trained them a lot faster on F-16s and we didn't because we were afraid of escalation. That's unfortunate.
I may not invade Ukraine, okay? It just doesn't work out well. So let's arm this guy. Let's do the minerals agreement so we'll have our American business interests. Putin doesn't understand what's going on. If we sign this minerals agreement, Putin is screwed.
Okay, that was my perspective. But again, I'm on the Republican side, and that's how I perceive this thing. Like, hey, look, that'll really tie us to our interests together if it's done right. If it's done right is a key thing here. Okay.
Because Trump will defend the deal.
Okay, so that's a really interesting thing here. Trump would want to defend that deal. Like that's a really interesting way of tying things together. Okay.
Deal with you, I hope, and he will defend America's interest. So this war is going to come in, I hope, sooner rather than later, and it's going to come in a way where it won't happen again. I have every confidence in the world that Donald Trump will end this war in a way that there will be no third invasion of Ukraine.
Okay. Now, the rest of us aren't necessarily so confident, but I would hope that it would work out that way. That would be preferable. Not sure. We have to, see concrete steps that direction. Here's another Republican's perspective, and he's very optimistic. What if Trump is setting Putin up? All U.S. intel supports the conclusion that he is not ready for any concessions. Give him the room, let him make a blank of himself, and everyone leaves pissed off, and then let the next round begin on the ground and in the air. Peaceniks can be muted by that outcome, and the pressure can be applied to the end the war in 2025 on Ukraine terms. So is Trump setting Putin up? Okay, I don't see the evidence of it. I would love to think that that's actually what's happening, but I just don't see that that's what's happening. And maybe it's not because I don't want to see that. I would love to see that, but I don't have evidence to say that that's happening or this is happening, and that's what we need to go by. Okay, Trump, this is Anton Geroshenko, Trump is not betraying Ukraine, but it's time for Europeans to stop panicking. And this word, whinging, I don't know what that is. I looked it up. I guess whining, it's the equivalent of whining. And step up, according to Boris Johnson. This seems like some old English word that I'm not familiar with. Okay, and Johnson says this: if Putin were to get Ukraine back under his tyrannical thumb, then a whole vast country would erupt in insurrection that makes Bosnia look like a picnic. The violence would last for decades, and the spillover would continue to drag down the world economy for years, and Trump doesn't want that. Now, say what you will about Boris Johnson, and I'm sure you have plenty to say about Boris Johnson, but I think he's right about this particular point. So let's actually hear him and put aside political party preferences and just listen.
Hi, folks. I'm here at the Munich Security Conference where everybody is having absolute conniptions about what the new Trump administration is saying about Ukraine. And they're saying it's a betrayal, they're saying it's appeasement. Well, I got to tell you, I don't necessarily agree with everything that President Trump says. I certainly don't share his apparent enthusiasm for Vladimir Putin. But if you look really at what he's actually saying about Ukraine, about his continuing support for Ukraine, I don't believe that he is going to betray that country, nor do I think that he can betray Ukraine.
That's interesting.
Hi.
Nor can he, because the realities on the ground, if you don't do this, what's going to happen and what's going to happen to your legacy and that sort of thing. So that makes me cautiously optimistic. Okay, here's Senator Lindsey Graham again. He's being asked a question, and we'll hear the question and then we'll hear the answer.
For you, do it what you did for us. Make Ukraine NATO member.
Well, yeah. I'm okay with you being NATO. I'm just being honest with you. I think there are a few countries who are not. My idea is a little bit different.
Okay, so now I would prefer to see Ukraine right into NATO right now. But if you can't be in NATO right now because the powers that be would not allow that, whether those powers are Trump or Orban or Slovakia or whatever, if you can set the conditions so that what he says, this is an interesting solution. It's not optimal, but it's interesting.
I want Putin to know if he ever does this again, you go into NATO right away. I want to take the mystery out of what happens if there's another invasion. You get sanctioned. There's a bunch of bad things come your way. We'll have troops on the ground in Ukraine. We'll have American business interest. We'll have a Ukrainian military that nobody in their right mind wants to fight. But how about this idea? If we can't get this man in NATO, like right now, can we tell Putin, if you ever do this again, he's going in NATO, like right away? Do you think he'd do it if that was clear to him?
Now, you'd have to set that where NATO has a pre-vote to say, or a vote to say Ukraine goes into NATO if Putin crosses the borders again. You'd have to do that the right way. But that's an interesting prospect that could have a dampening effect on things. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, Russian ruler Putin is going to declare victory regardless of peace talks outcomes, he said. And I think that's very right. I think the propaganda machine is going to spin up. Here's Alexander Dugin saying the deconstruction of the EU has begun. Trampled, humiliated, beaten, flattened, liberal European globalists can say nothing. What a spectacle. So they're already doing that about what's going on in the Munich conference. Here's Che Ballas talking about Vladimir Putin as the intellectual, strategic, and political superior of every single European leader in quotes. The fact that over 80% of Russians here fully support him only serves to drive the Western elite's hatred of this man. Well, okay, so there's not a fact that 80% support him. There's a rigged election, but there are a lot in Russian, admittedly, that think highly of him. A man Russians respect and trust now more than ever. Okay, well, he's also destroying your country in the same time. Here's the MFA of Russia saying Western leaders who rubber stamp decisions to pump up the Kiev Nazis with more money and weapons are complicit in crimes against humanity. How weirdly backwards, smoke and mirrors, bizarro kind of world is that? They will not escape responsibility for what they're doing. What? The ones that are arming the person that was attacked, the innocent attacked by the aggressor, they will not escape responsibility for what they're doing. Wow. So, I mean, they're going to say that. Now, what's the practical effect of this? While the West engages in empty talk and bickers, it's going to be China and Russia who are already partitioning occupied Ukraine, worth $12 trillion in natural resources. Dozen Chinese companies started operations in occupied Ukraine. Putin can fund his war forever. So as long as this occupied territory, these 4 new oblasts and Crimea are being occupied by Russia, yeah, I mean, that's the practical effect, that they're going to be looting it. Okay. Now, last little bit, there was a much made about how Trump put a portrait of Reagan in the White House, in the Oval Office. Like that was a thing. That was an intentional thing. But I think the reality is it looks more like that portrait is like the I don't know what it is. It's not Starry Night. Whatever. What's the thing where the guy's got his, and put in the comments what's the portrait where he's got his face like that's what Reagan must be doing right now if he can see what's going on, because wow. All right, my friends, that's about all that I have. This one more thing. 14 February 2022. This guy says, sorry, maybe I'll be against what you hear in the mainstream media, but there will be no invasion. Repeat with me, there will be no invasion. So, okay, there we are. Thank you for your time, my friends. That's it. That's all that I have. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.